Okay, here we go. I think I'm live now. It's like a lot of you are logged in. Um, Bear with me. I'm publishing this thing right now for you all. So while we are doing that, I'd like you to either comment or text me or whatever about what you would like to see for the rest of class. Now, um, now that we've covered basic business entity formation, contracts, some of those things, from this point on in the course, we tend to just cover, how would you say it? We don't really have any major units that are all just one big thing, right? It's all um, kind of one, two chapters here and there to cover basic principles on things related to business law. Um, So, for example, we'll have a class on trusts and estates, one on real estate contracts, such as real estate sales, how title works, how mortgages work. We'll probably talk about bankruptcy. There's quite a few subjects like that, intellectual property, copyrights, patents, things like that. So, sorry, my allergies are horrible today. I promise I'm not sick. But so if you could comment or text over the next minute or so while I get this thing published, what would be something that you're interested in um, learning about? Take the next, minute, 30 seconds or so to do that. What would you like to cover next? Okay, so bear with me for a second. Okay, I think I got that published. Okay, so I've got a quiz on chapters 12 through 13 published into your module 3 contracts thing. Looks like we've got one comment about real estate contracts, which is kind of where I was thinking of going today. Um, Looks like is nobody else interested in anything? They're just like, just get done with this class, man. Okay, so we've got a second for real estate contracts. Okay, let's go ahead and do that then. I'm going to pull up the link here for where are we here? Oh, here we go. I'm going to paste this in here so you guys have your textbook link to that chapter. So this is on the basics of real estate law as kind of an introduction to real estate sales and leases and things like that. For real estate, what I prefer to do, I'm very Utah specific with this. Okay. So keep in mind, other states may vary, some to greater degrees than others, but Utah kind of has its own system for that. Each state does, and I'll bring up especially when there's a major difference there in real estate systems. One of the things I also like to focus on as part of our real estate discussion, just so you're aware, is water rights and how that works under our laws and under some of the other states. There's a very approximate divide in water law treatment, and that division is roughly the Mississippi River. Okay, so everything east of the Mississippi River has one system, everything west has another system. So we'll talk about that as well. Okay, so let's dive into real estate. Now, um, sorry, I'm trying to get comfortable here. Let's see. There we go. I think this will work so that I can scroll back and forth. Okay, here we go. So, when we're talking about real estate, first of all, we have to define what um, what real estate is, what a real estate right is. Okay, um, real estate rights are tricky because um, you can own the whole thing, and what is the whole thing, and you can own fractions of the whole thing. And how do we define those fractions? Okay, so first of all, what is the whole thing? When we're talking about real estate, under the common law rules, um, kind of this traditional mindset, which we've altered over time with changes in technology and our understanding of science and our access to things. But under the common law, when you own real estate, you own basically a cone, right? So you have a sphere that's the earth. Let's see if I can, you have your sphere, right? And you have your little piece of real estate here on the sphere, and you own the cone that goes all the way to the center of the earth and then comes out to your property. So you get that wedge, and then you get an infinitely larger piece of the sky forever and ever, right? That was kind of the understanding. The depths below and the skies above. Okay. However, um, that's changed over time, right? Sometimes we'll limit those depths below. You may or may not own the water or the minerals below your land. Maybe other people have the ability to um, mine minerals under your land, even if you're using the surface. Um, Likewise, with the skies, maybe a local government has claimed certain altitudes above your property for military airspace. Maybe commercial airliners can use other altitudes above your property. Uh, oh, sorry. Let's see. We have a question. What chapter is this? This is chapter. What is this? 36? No, 33. I'm sorry. And I posted the link in the discussion right there where it says Tyler Melling and then the sailor.org GitHub thing. Anyway, that is a link to the chapter that covers some of these basics. But what I'm talking about right now isn't necessarily in the chapter, it's just an introduction. So, which is why we rely upon not only the video stream or not only the text, but the video stream as well. Okay. Um, but we have, so um, we have another, um, sorry. Yeah. So we may put limitations on those skies above. Further, maybe your local ordinances will prohibit how high you can build a building on that land as a way to protect other people's views or maintain a certain aesthetic, right? So we may only be able to build a few stories. That being said, do let's say somebody has a view of a mountain, okay, and your property is between their property and the mountain, and legally you're allowed to build a 30-foot high home on that land. And by building that, you end up blocking their view of the mountain. Do they have a right to that view? Usually not. Okay. They only have the right to control their land. Okay. So that's kind of how this real estate regulation works, or this basic idea of ownership. Further, a local government may want to limit your ability to develop it for certain purposes. Maybe a certain area is only to be residential. Maybe others are only to be industrial. Um, Maybe it's because of other uses nearby, for example airports. If you've got an airport, oftentimes in certain zones surrounding an airport you may have limitations on what kinds of structures and the height and the construction practices and different things, as a way to protect those interests. So just keep in mind when we're talking about real estate, generally we're talking about your parcel and everything above and everything below, subject to federal, state, and local ordinances that may limit those uses to some extent. Okay. Um, Now, if we own that, and we have total ownership of that property without any limitation other than those laws, we call that a fee simple estate. And in this chapter, there's a lot of different types of estates. You do not need to remember these. Okay. If this was a business, or sorry, a law school property class, we would expect you to remember all of these. For this class, we don't. Okay. But it has, freehold estate, leasehold estate, fee simple absolute, fee simple defeasible, life estate, life tenant, dower, reversion. There's a lot of different things. I really do not expect you to remember any of these. Okay. So just keep in mind, the one I do want you to remember is fee simple, which is basically, um, you own it, it's yours. Okay. Um, the other one that, we'll get to in a little bit is life estate, right? So you own it for life, and then it goes back to someone else or some other kind of use after you've passed away. Okay, those are the only two I want you to remember. And we'll talk about why that is in a little bit. Um, but so as a way of kind of historical background, a lot of this property law came about 1,000 years ago. In 1066 AD, William the Conqueror took over England and imposed a certain property rights system where, subject to his rule as king, where he owns all the land, you can hold certain estates in that land and be given certain rights to control that land or even let others use it, things like that, right? So we have that now. Everybody has the ability to own land, to manage it according to um, their own desires, subject to the will of the king, right, which is the federal government. Um, there's political discussions back and forth on what that means, right? But the federal government, state, and local ultimately can, under our current legal structure, make determinations on how you use land and even take it from you, which we'll cover later on how that happens. Okay. Um, but so fee simple basically means you own the property. Okay. Um, Now, um, so in this chapter, in the second section, rights incident to possession and ownership of real estate, it talks about the rights to the airspace and the depths, um, and rights to water. Okay, so let's talk about water for a minute. Um, and I apologize, my allergies are just really bad today. Okay, so sorry, guys. Okay, so with water, um, you don't necessarily own water anywhere in the United States, right? It's all subject to, and sorry, you don't own the water just because you own the real estate. So if there's water on your land, whether on the surface or below the ground, you don't necessarily own that. That's usually a separate right. And depending on where you are in the United States, there's two different systems. Okay, and I'm going to write them in the chat. They these are written in your text too, actually. Okay, so Eastern states use riparian. Western states use prior appropriation. You guys spelled that right. Yeah. Okay. Um, so the eastern states, so everything east of the Mississippi River, give or take a few states, right, uses this riparian doctrine. So basically, you have the right under riparian rules to use water that's on the surface of your property if it flows through it, for example. So if you have like a stream running through your property, you can use the stream. You can build a small dam to build up pressure to run a water mill, for example. A lot of if you're not familiar what that is, it's the giant wheel that spins, right? So people will divert the water that runs through their property to make that wheel spin. You're using the power of gravity and water to spin that wheel, usually to make another machine work. More traditionally, that was used for spinning a millstone to grind wheat into flour. Okay. So these kinds of things are totally fine in a riparian system. You can also divert some of that water to water your crops, anything like that. The key with a riparian system, though, is that whatever you do, you can't adversely impact those downstream from you, right? So um, you can't really consume. Let's see. What does it mean if you're in a Western state but following the riparian doctrine? Mm, um, there might be a few of those. I'd have to check my book. I have a book about yay thick on the different state water laws. Um, what does it mean if your neighbor's in a Western state but following the riparian? Oh, I see. It depends, right? So there's variation, and I'll get to that in a minute too. Um, on some of the western states. So in the but this eastern states, basically, as long as you're not impacting the people downstream from you, you're fine to use that water. It doesn't cover navigable waters, right? Which is like a lake or something you can navigate a ship on. Okay, is kind of navigable waters. Um, the um, One of the rules that came out from the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, a few years ago, basically said, well, all water is navigable water because every drop of rain that falls, whether on a rooftop, crops, anything like that, could eventually flow down into navigable waters. Therefore, we're going to regulate them as such. That rule was obviously considered inappropriate, and there's still some legal battles over the nuances there. But um, so navigable waters totally different, right? Because those are covered by the federal government. But from a state law standpoint, anything that's flowing through, like a stream in a riparian state, pretty much you can use that stream as long as you're not impacting those downstream. And then another question. You know what? I hear the trash truck, and I didn't get the trash. Sorry, just a second, honey. Okay, guys, sorry. I heard a truck and realized I forgot to take the trash out last night. So I might be in trouble. We'll see. Um, anyway, um, so, where were we? Oh, right. So with riparian doctrine, and those, anyway, so I'd like to move on from that, because we don't live in a riparian state. We live in a prior appropriation state. Um, Prior appropriation is different, right? It considered, arguably, some would say short-sightedly, the need to develop and civilize the West. Okay, so um, almost everything west of the Mississippi is a prior appropriation state, and some, depending on their water resources, when they achieve statehood, things like that, might have some riparian principles at play to varying degrees. Okay, but for the most part, this prior appropriation doctrine says first in time, first in right. And what that means is, if you laid a claim to it, let's say, we're 150 years ago, um, and did we miss it? Yes. Okay, we got the trash out in time. Okay, um, so we um, uh, sorry guys. Oh, so let's say I'm here in Cedar City. Okay, 150 years ago, um, and um, this at this time, I I decided that I wanted to irrigate my land. Okay, I've got a fifth of an acre. Okay, very small for uh, what would have been 150 years ago, but uh, nonetheless, I want to irrigate it. Okay. We didn't have wells at the time. We didn't have electricity to pump those wells anyway. So what I would have done is I would have dug a ditch from Coal Creek, uh, just to the east of me. And I would have dug that ditch to divert water from the stream to my land to irrigate it. Okay. Um, that way I have water on my land. I create a stream, basically. Okay. So the way that that would have worked 150 years ago under this prior, would that be legal today? Maybe. So we'll get to that. But yeah, so I dig this ditch. Um, I irrigate my land, and um, the ditch has water in it. Okay, there's water flowing. Therefore, I have a claim to that water from now on for all eternity. Right? I developed the water. I built the infrastructure. I've put it to a beneficial use. So um, waste is not considered a beneficial use. Crops are, livestock are, housing, that's a beneficial use. Um, Arguably, if you're building a reservoir for storage, that could even be considered a um, beneficial use. Okay, so I put it to some kind of benefit. And the argument there is because I put it to a benefit, it benefits all and it benefits society. And I am to be rewarded for my work. So, because I did the work and created the infrastructure, those are my rights. Okay. And no one can claim them from me. Um, and the date that I proved that I put it to beneficial use, that's my priority date, right? And that's going to come up later, priority date. Okay. So let's say my priority date is 1870. Okay. Now let's say 20 years later, um, I want to use my ditch to expand my 1/5 of an acre to a 500-acre field, right? And there's still enough water to do that. Okay. So 20 years later, I start diverting a lot more water to develop my 500-acre field. Well, it turns out someone downstream from me, who is behind me? No one's behind me. That's someone seeing someone behind me. That's creepy, right? Anyway, um, who is behind me? Now I'm kind of worried. Like, there's someone creeping behind me or what? Anyway, no. Um, okay, if you could clarify that, mini wolves or min wolves. Sorry, no, it's the tree. My bad. Okay, there we go. Okay, good thing we don't teach this class at night. That then I'd um, be a little worried. So um, anyway, no. So let's say my 500 acres, I start irrigating that. Okay, that uses a lot more water than my fifth of an acre. Now, someone downstream from me um, comes upstream and knocks on my door and says, "Hey, I don't have water." And I say, "Well, what are you talking about?" And they say, "Well, I've got a field downstream and I've been watering it for 15 years and I have no water now." Um, and I'd say, "Well, that's, um, that's tough. Too bad, right?" So this prior appropriation doctrine says you should be rewarded for putting in infrastructure, and if you're first, uh, that priority rules, right? First in time, first in right. And I say, well, I built my ditch 20 years ago. They say, well, built mine 15, but I'm only now running out of water. Okay, so we can see where we've got a problem. Now, my claim from 20 years ago, I built the infrastructure, but I've only been using that to irrigate a fifth of an acre. Okay, just a little piece of land. So then someone else 15 years ago says, "Look, I've got enough water to irrigate 500 acres." So they build their infrastructure and start irrigating 500 acres. And their priority date is from 15 years ago. Okay. So now, when I start using more, even though I'm using the same infrastructure, I'm only just now starting to use more. If I wanted to prove up on that and show that I could use that without impacting others, then yeah, I get the right to irrigate 500 acres. But my historical use has only been enough to irrigate a fifth of an acre. Therefore, my infrastructure and my right only covers that one fifth of an acre, if that makes any sense at all. Okay. So in a dispute, what a court would say is, well, you in so let's assume there's enough water to irrigate 600 acres, okay, coming out of the stream. So my fifth of an acre gets very first priority, okay, because I was the first one to build the infrastructure, and I should be rewarded for that. Okay, so I irrigate my fifth of an acre, and that's the first right. Okay, looks like there's still excess in the creek. Okay, so this other person who's got 500 acres, they can now use all of that 500 acres of irrigation water to irrigate their land. Okay, because they were the next right. Right, they've been using it for like 15 years. There's been enough water for them to do that, and it's only when I'm using 500 acres worth of water that they're diminished. Okay, so we want to give them their historical use too, which is 500 acres. Now we only have 99 enough water to irrigate 99 and 4/5 acres now, right? Um, and so now, if there's no other users in the stream, then yeah, I can go ahead and irrigate another 99 and 4/5 acres, but I can't just take all the water, okay? Because the other person is rewarded for building their infrastructure. I know that's kind of an abstract concept, but I want you all to kind of understand it. So let's put this to the test, right? So let's say we have a drought year and there's only enough water coming out of that stream to irrigate 400 acres. Okay. Now, the person downstream says, well, I've got 500, so I need all of that, right? They can't claim that because my fifth of an acre, my little parcel, that comes first because I was the first to build the infrastructure. Okay. So in years of shortage, I get my priority date is the oldest. Therefore, I get the first right to irrigate that little bit. Okay, then downstream, they're going to take all the rest because their priority date predates my expansion, right? So before I can water anything more than my little fifth of an acre, they need to be made whole and they can use all the rest of the water if there's not enough. Okay. Now in excess years, if there's enough to irrigate 1,000 acres, then great. I'll take my fifth first. They take their 500, then I can take, uh, you know, 499.8 worth. So I hope that makes sense. We, I don't want to dwell on this too much longer because we have other things to cover. But I hope that makes sense. Okay. Now, there's a few other principles with water that we need to talk about. So first of all is how do we measure water? I think water should be free. Yeah, that's that's true. Um, well, and do water rights stay with the land or owner when sold? Um, that's also a good question. Okay. Um, okay, so I'll come to both of those in a little bit. Um, So when we're looking at water, what we do is we measure them in acre feet. Okay. And I forget how much an acre foot is. I think it's like 575,000 gallons or something. But when we're dealing with large water quantities, we gallons are no longer an effective way to measure. So we usually measure in acre feet. Okay. And an acre foot is how much water it would take to cover an acre of land in 1 foot of water. Okay. Um, and um, so when we measure in those terms, it's easier to think about the historical use of that water as well. Okay. So, for example, um, the if you have a 1 acre of land and you're using a flood irrigation method where you take water out of the stream and you flood your farmland, right? Um, Historically speaking, it takes about 4 acre feet to irrigate that land in a year. So, because flooding is not the most effective way to do that, right? When you flood it, you lose quite a bit to irrigation and you lose quite a bit to dripping back down into the aquifer. Okay, so as it drips down into the water system below ground, you're losing that. So not all of it is applied to the crops. Um, when So because of that, it takes about 4 acre feet to properly irrigate, for example, a field of alfalfa or something like that. So 4 acre feet per acre. Um, Now that's changed over time, right? So if you have the sprayers, um, you're maybe only actually applying um, a couple feet of water over the year, but none of that is going back into the aquifer and recharging it. You're losing a lot less to evaporation. So, anyway, these are different things to think about. But nonetheless, your duty or the legally required volume of water to use or water right to own to be able to use it for something is measured in acre feet. So, for example, if you have 1 acre of land that you want to farm, you have to own in Utah, and this varies state by state, but in Utah, you have to own 4 acre feet of water rights per acre you want to farm. Okay. And that's the only number I want you to remember from our water discussion, right? So 4 acre feet of water per acre of land. So you'll have a test question, something like, um, I have a 100-acre farm. How many acre feet of water rights is it going to take to be able to irrigate that farm? To have the legal ability to do that. And it's going to be 400 acre feet, right? So 100-acre farm, 400 acre feet of land of water to cover that land. Okay. Regardless of how much you're actually going to use. If you're flood irrigating, yeah, you're probably going to use 4 acre-feet of water. If you're using sprayers, you might only use two. If you're using high efficiency sprayers, you might only even use 1.5 acre-feet of water per acre. But regardless, you need 4 acre-feet of water rights, and we can start to see where there are some inefficiencies there. So there's no incentive legally to be efficient with water, which is why there are some groups lobbying to create some flexibility in there. So we have economic considerations for conservation, and there's an economic incentive to conserve water. Um, Likewise, so livestock is a little different too. So if you want to use the water to keep cows, you want to keep a certain number of cows or sheep or goats or pigs or any other kind of animal, you need a certain number of water rights or acre feet per animal. And those calculations are much more complicated. So I don't expect you to remember them. It is more efficient water wise than land, but um, anyway, those are a little more complicated than we need to get for this class. There are some other concerns too. So if you want to build a house, okay, regardless of whether you're gonna, if you want green space around the house, like a lawn or orchard or garden or anything like that, uh, that's treated as irrigated land, and you need, for the irrigated part, you do need water. But if you want to build a house, regardless of the size of the house is going to take a certain number of water rights. Usually it's about 0.65 acre feet is what they're going to want you to own to be able to build a house. Now, if you're just hooking into a city line to build your house in the city, that's different. You're just going to pay, usually it's an impact fee. So you're going to pay a fee to the city as part of your building permit. And that fee in part represents the cost of the right that the city has to obtain to be able to justify giving you water. Um, if you're out in the county, outside of a municipal entity, you might need to provide either, if you're going to use a pump to provide your own water um, from a well, you have to obtain your own water rights, that 0.65 or so to be able to build and to pump a well. Or if you're going to hook into another water system, there's something like that as well. Okay. Um, and then let's see. So, oh yeah. So water rights staying with the land when it's sold. Yeah. So the um, the word there is appurtenance. Okay. So and that's spelled weird. Spelled like that. Okay. Appurtenance is the word that's used there. So is the water appurtenant to the land? Meaning, or is the land and the water, are they tied together or not? Okay. Some time ago, I want to say about 2008, give or take a few years, um, Utah changed its law so that water is no longer implied to be appurtenant to land. Okay. So for years and years and years, if you sold land and it had water rights appurtenant to it or as part of it, um, then yeah, the water just followed the land, right? It was implied to follow. That's not the case anymore. Okay, so unless the deed says with all water rights appurtenant thereunto, something like that, um, then they're not together. Okay, usually, ever since whatever that date was, 2008, give or take a few years, we have two separate deeds. So we'll do like a warranty deed for the real estate, and then we'll do a special warranty deed for the water rights that are separate from the land. Okay. So that's, and then it depends. Some of those rights come in the form of, sorry, there we go. Some of those rights come in the form of um, uh, like irrigation rights from a water company. That so you have rights to access the creek at certain times or during certain windows of time, depending on the water levels that year. Other times, you have rights to access a well or rights to um, harvest water from the land in any other way, whether it be pumping or collection of rainwater or something like that. Okay. So these rights are all different, and they're all treated different ways. But generally, the right to water is treated as if it were its own set of real estate. So without being land itself, it's in every other way it's treated like a right to real estate under this prior appropriation doctrine. And as such, so that priority date, I want to go back to that. That priority date comes into play. So let's say Cedar City is a good example. Okay, this valley here, um, we have a safe yield of approximately 21,000 acre feet a year, meaning um, in this valley, about 21,000 acre feet of water fall and go into the groundwater system. Okay. A lot of other water, arguably 10 times as much, actually falls in the form of rain or snow or otherwise flows into this valley. But a lot of it gets either evaporates or is used by plants before it can percolate down into the aquifer. Okay, so our aquifer, our below ground water resource, has a safe yield of 21,000 acre feet a year. And that means that you can pump safely about 21,000 acre feet of water a year from that aquifer without having any kind of negative effect on that aquifer. Okay. Um, However, we pump more than that out of our aquifer right now. We pump 28,000 acre feet roughly out of that aquifer. Um, and some of that's used for people, some of that's used for livestock, some of that's used for crops, and mostly alfalfa. Okay. Some of that's used for grass and lawns. Okay, so we pump more than the safe yield, meaning we pump more than is recharging. So if you're doing that, it's called mining the aquifer, where you have your water table here. This is where the water level is, and then over time it pumps, and it decreases because you're mining it. You're pumping more than is recharging. Okay. Some areas of the valley, depending on where the wells are, that water table's dipped a couple hundred feet. Others, it's dropped maybe 50 feet. It just kind of depends. In the short term, that's not a big deal at that scale. But in the long term, that becomes quite an issue for ecological reasons, structural damage to buildings and infrastructure, lack of storage capacity and flood mitigation capacity, different things like that. So there's a lot of other factors where in the long term, over decades, and as that depreciation continues and well levels drop more than a couple hundred feet into the several hundreds and even thousands of feet, that can cause a lot of issues. So, as a way to keep that from happening, the state of Utah, their state engineer's office has a way to deal with that. And it's called a groundwater management plan. Okay. So, a groundwater management plan basically comes in and says, look, Cedar City Basin, your safe yield is 21,000 acre feet. You're pumping 28. Therefore, we need to reduce your, sorry, see if this is a student. Nope. Okay. Therefore, we need to reduce your usage of your aquifer by 25% to make sure that you're not pumping more than is going in. And what they do is they do that by priority date. So they say, you've got 28,000 acre feet that are being pumped. And so what we're going to do is we're going to identify the priority dates for everybody and tell people to shut off their water based on priority date. So it's the same as the idea of the stream, right? The stream comes, and based on priority date, we're going to ration the water. So the earliest users, they get the very first priority. The later users, they may have their ability to water totally barred. And that's what a groundwater management plan does as well. As it says, if your priority date is too late, we're gonna say that you can no longer use your water. Um, and For the most part, most of the users uh, under that groundwater management plan for this basin are municipal users. Okay, so the cities and counties, their water rights are the newest rights. Okay, so they're going to be cut off, which means those cities need to find ways either to cut water usage and they do that by pricing people out of the market, right? So if if the first 12,000 gallons a month or whatever are free, or very low price, so that a family living a normal lifestyle, in overwatering their lawn, then that's going to cost them. People uh, can afford the basic needs, but once you start using more than a certain amount, you get priced out of the market. 3, 4, 500 bucks a month or more. And that's what cities like Phoenix, San Antonio, where I grew up, would do that in short water years. So there are different things like that those cities can do to reduce water usage. Um, Another thing they can do is they can go to the people who have the older rights, like say some of the farm and the agricultural users. They can say, you know what, you've got rights that are as old as water rights can be in this valley, and we'd like to buy those rights from you. Um, those rights are, uh, we're on the market right now. It's about 4,000 an acre foot. So if you're buying water rights, on the open market in this basin right now, it's about $4,000 per acre foot. So then the city or other municipality can go to these older users that have a priority date that's much older than theirs. Say, look, we want 200 acre feet of water or 1,000 acre feet of water or whatever, and we're going to pay you that rate of 4,000 an acre foot. And if they want to, oh, that's classy. Um, it's Interesting. Yeah, someone's being nice um on our thread, so that's classy. Um, Sorry guys. I hope none of you were triggered. Okay. uh, anyway, classy chat. That's what happens when you've got a public chat. So sorry guys. Um, so anyway, um, you guys have any other questions about water rights before we go? Okay, so I'll wait a second for questions on water rights. Um, and then anyway, so for today's chapter, what we're gonna do is oh dear. Um, anyway, so what we're gonna do is take the quiz that I posted to Top Hat. I'll post another one pretty soon to cover the last couple classes when I get the content up there too. Give you all about 24 hours. This one I just posted. Nice, classy. Um, I love it when 12-year-olds get on YouTube. So anyway, let me know if you have any other questions, guys, and we'll keep posting the assignments to the. Oh dear. Okay, how do I just hide the chat? Because this is funny. Anyway, um, we'll keep posting assignments, and yeah, we'll have class next week. We'll see you guys later.